a lot, and they had a little sheep farm that still belongs to my cousin. Actually, she still farms it. It's got a shepherd there.
Good.
So just down the road from Scott's Gap. So I've got very, very fond memories of Northampton. Sadly, they've both died now, so I just don't. In the last sort of 8 years, we've hardly been up. So I really miss coming up there.
That's good. So Mark, before being ordained as the Reverend Mark Harris, did you have a proper job before that?
Well, no, not really, to be honest, Don. I mean, so it's one of those jobs in the city that, it's sort of hard to describe and you can't really sort of believe actually exists. But it's a job that I stumbled into out of university in the mid-90s. It sounded interesting, but I had no idea what it was. But it was investor relations, financial communications, basically. So the job was, we were a consultancy advising sort of FTSE 100 and sort of FTSE 250 type companies on all their communications with the financial markets. So we helped them produce their annual reports, do their investor presentations. We'd be their sort of middleman for getting feedback back from their investors, all that kind of stuff. And I joined it was a startup based in the mid-90s. And I had a really amazing time. I ended up really, really enjoying it. So I landed on my feet.
Good. And when I was introduced to the House of Lords, you were already in post. So as far as Christians in Parliament is concerned, so what led to that appointment?
That's a good question too, but because I can't say it was a massively sort of planned move from me. But I in that city job, I was kind of gradually itching to do more in terms of full-time paid sort of Christian sort of teaching and pastoral ministry. I was toying with the idea of getting ordained, and as that job came to an end, a friend of mine told me about this job being advertised in Parliament, which was essentially a chaplaincy role attached to the Christians in Parliament group. I was completely amazed that any kind of role like that existed in Parliament, and I loved the idea of it, and I thought I was fairly well suited. I've been sort of spent the last 20 years dealing with these very difficult CEOs and chairmen, etc., and I thought I'd probably have enough self-confidence to try and exercise a Christian ministry amongst our politicians. So I went for it. So I kind of put ordination on hold at that stage. That was 2012. And then over the first sort of 4 years of being in the job, the longer I was there, the more it made sense to me to actually get ordained to do the job that I was doing. I was essentially doing the job of a chaplain in Parliament. So the then Bishop of London allowed me to train part-time and do a part-time curacy. I'm coming towards the end of a part-time curacy in a local parish in central London now, but I've been able to carry on in Parliament all that time, but part-time training for the Church of England.
The Christians in Parliament work, and colleagues on the line here may have heard me talk about Christians in Parliament before, but it's sponsored by the Bible Society. Can you just explain how that works?
Yeah, it's part sponsored by Bible Society. So Bible Society employ me at the moment 3 days a week to essentially be seconded to the Christians in Parliament group, and they also generously give me a budget, an annual budget that I can spend on putting on events in Parliament. When we host guest events and invite lots of parliamentarians and staff to come along to advertise the chapel services we do, etc. And they also very significantly are the main organisation behind the organisation of the National Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast every year. And they've been doing that since about 2005, because there's an enormous amount of administration and organisation that goes on behind it. So they are a really key and valued partner, for whom we're really grateful. But I also, since being there, we've expanded the work a bit. So Claire and Alison, who work alongside me, are both actually directly employed by the Parliamentary Christian Trust, which is a charity that sits behind, it's the legal body that sits behind Christians in Parliament, and it employs them directly. So we're also, the ministry is also resourced by a variety of other Christian trusts and individual Christian donors who basically fund those two salaries.
So tell us about the work of Christian Parliament. What would a typical week look like, and what are the sort of major events in the year?
Well, the aim of Christians in Parliament is threefold. Basically, it's to encourage those who are professing Christian politicians and staff, to encourage them and equip them in their work in the Houses of Parliament, in their personal faith, but also kind of living it out in Parliament. Secondly, we're trying to be a thought-provoking presence there in Parliament for anyone of any faith, be they atheist, of any faith at all, about the relevance and the goodness of the Christian faith to all of us at a personal level and also a public level. So we're trying to be a Christian witness of some sort in Parliament. And thirdly, we're seeking to demonstrate the public relevance of the Christian faith to our public life. So what's the relevance of Christianity to politics? What can it provide in terms of foundations for our public life? We're not there as a kind of a Christian lobbying organisation to make specific policy proposals at a very applied level, but we are there at a very kind of deep foundational level to try and equip Christian parliamentarians with, well, look, what is a basic kind of biblical worldview in terms of what is a good human life, and how then does that then apply in practice to all the different policy areas that you parliamentarians have to get to grips with? That's up to you to then go and apply, but we try and provide the kind of the basic soil, as it were, for thinking about those things. So it's those three areas, and in practice those work out as, on the first area, in terms of Christian discipleship, we have 2 weekly Bible study groups for MPs and peers, one of which you're a part of on a Wednesday morning. There's one on a Tuesday morning as well. And they're attended by about sort of 8 to 10 members regularly. And normally we meet physically in Parliament, but we've been meeting on Zoom this last year. We have a Tuesday lunchtime chapel service that normally meets in the beautiful chapel in Parliament and has about sort of up to 40 people. Again, since lockdown, we're a steady sort of 20 odd people on a Tuesday lunchtime, about a third members, about 2/3 staff. And that's a mixture of me speaking a bit, and then we have lots of guest speakers in. And at the moment, we can obviously pull them in from all over the place because everyone's at home. And then a certain amount, again, in normal times, I would do quite a lot of meeting up with members one-to-one for cups of coffee, etc., on the parliamentary estate, and to try and be a pastoral support to them at a more intimate level. That might be kind of helping them living out their Christian lives in terms of their family life and their political life. It might be all sorts of things, just trying to encourage them. And I do a certain amount of meeting up with members one-to-one who are actually just exploring the Christian faith for the first time. They might have come to a carol service or something and were provoked to think, and I might do a kind of basic sort of exploring Christianity course together with them one-to-one. That's the first area. Second area, trying to be thought-provoking about the Christian faith. We try and get in sort of better known people to come in and speak about that. We've had David Suchet in recent years. We've had a Hollywood actor most recently, David Oyelowo, who appeared. You may have seen the film Selma. He played Martin Luther King in Selma, and he was in that film United Kingdom, if you've seen that. He was brilliant, just talking about his faith basically and Hollywood. And then the third area, in terms of trying to provide some biblical foundations for politics and public life. We produce sort of 2 or 3 written briefings each year for members to cogitate on, and then we sometimes have panel discussions, and probably the parliamentary prayer breakfast. Oh, and we have a monthly discussion group for members, specifically on political theology and how does, at the moment, for instance, we're trying to apply a biblical worldview to thinking about climate change and the environment, and what difference does it make being a Christian politician in that whole debate? What can we bring distinctively to that? And the prayer breakfast, I'll just say that that's more of a sort of distinct, it's almost in a sort of 4th category of its own, because it covers all those previous 3. It normally meets in Westminster Hall once a year. It's about 700 people that you can fit in there. It's mainly church leaders from around the country inviting their local MP or their local, they've got a peer who lives locally, getting them to the breakfast and then hearing, again, a guest speaker saying something that is gently thought-provoking about the relevance of Christianity, both personally but also to public life. We sing a couple of hymns. It's a really great event. The speaker and the Lord speaker host it. And last year we did it virtually, and we had about 3,000, over 3,000 people sort of joining live from all over the country. And this year we're going to be doing it virtually again in June. So do tell your any local church leaders where you are to get in contact with us through the Christians in Parliament website, because we'd love to invite them. And the idea this year is to do it on a Friday morning, and for those local church leaders to invite the local MP. I don't know, who is it for around you?
It's Guy Opperman here.
Guy Opperman. So to invite Guy Opperman, to maybe to the Vallum or wherever you meet, or to a church hall, and actually watch the breakfast all together, assuming by that stage we can actually have that kind of smaller gathering in June, and to watch the prayer breakfast together. And a big aim of that event is trying to get church leaders working together really closely with MPs in their local communities.
Okay. Now, and final one before we perhaps break, Max. Whenever I've talked about House of Lords and being a Christian in the House of Lords, people ask me, so are there many Christians in the House of Lords or in Parliament? Of course, it's an impossible question to answer. Only God knows the state of each heart. But give our colleagues here a feel for the number of active Christians that you come across in your work, Mark.
Oh, it is so hard to kind of give a kind of an accurate figure on that, because you sort of come across the sort of different overlapping circles of people who engage in different areas of our ministry a bit more than others. I mean, I've said, there's 2 groups. Those, if everyone turned up to those 2 weekly Bible study groups, there'd probably be about 15 in one and 10 in the other. So that's quite a kind of committed core. On the Tuesday chapel services, you get a certain number turning up. I mean, when, for instance, we had our Christians in Parliament steering group meeting this week, didn't we? Which is entirely sort of voluntary turn up thing. But, I was interested that we had almost 20 members on there. But again, that's not very accurate. I mean, something like the prayer breakfast. I mean, in recent years, we've been having about 120, 130 MPs, about another 50 peers turning up. But again, that would be a broader spectrum. There'd be members turning up to that saying, frankly, I know this is not really a priority for me, but I've been invited by my local church leader. I think that probably the best thing I can say is many more than you might, you'd be positively surprised by the level, the number of Christians working in Parliament as politicians.
What has impressed me recently is the number of, I would say, younger MPs who entered the Parliament in 2015 or 2019, very recently, who are Christians. It's really quite encouraging how many MPs in their 40s with young families are really serious, committed Christians, which is quite encouraging.
Yeah, that's really helpful point to make. Yeah, I mean, compared to if you were to look at Parliament 30 years ago, you know, it would have been, yeah, certainly sort of cultural Christianity, sort of establishment Christianity probably would have been stronger in some kind of way, but actual kind of politicians there who were actively committed Christians, who were really there believing it and wanting to kind of live it out, much higher proportion now, I would say, than 30 years ago. And I think that partly reflects the church growth in the UK in the last sort of 50 years, is that there have been a lot of growing churches where people have been taught about living all your life for Christ, you know, wherever you are, that your faith, if this is true, if Jesus has died and resurrected, and this is God who's come in history, then it means everything for all of life. And so therefore, I think there's been more encouragement for people to get involved in places like politics where they can make a difference.
Yeah. Good. Max, do you want to break for chat time? Yeah. No, thank you for joining us. And it's good that you don't have to travel 300 miles on the East Coast line to be here. So thank you for coming on board and for your work. And, you know, on behalf of those of us in Parliament, Christians in Parliament do a phenomenal job. Mark and the team are fantastic in the way they support everybody. He and Claire and Alison are really, really dedicated followers of the Lord Jesus, and we all benefit enormously from them. So thank you very much for all you do. So over to you, Mark.
So if everybody might be better to change your view to speaker view so you can get a better view of Mark if you're on gallery view now.
Yeah. Haven't got a very exciting backdrop, I'm afraid. Well, thank you very much. It's really so lovely to join you all this morning. It's a real joy and a real privilege. So thank you for having me. And I'd love a chance to get up the Northeastern line another time in the future. I miss Northumberland, but anyway, given what we've just been talking about, Westminster and politics and Parliament and power, etc., I thought I'd just reflect this morning a bit on the nature of power itself, under three headings. The first one is the pursuit of power. The second, the problem with power. And the third is the secret of true power. So first of all, let's have a think about the pursuit of power. And I want you to picture the scene. It's an Italian restaurant in Islington, North London. It's May 1994. And the Labour Party leader, John Smith, has just died. Some of you may recognize the scene that I'm about to describe. There are two men sitting at a corner table. Only one of them is drinking the Chianti, and the atmosphere is tense, to say the least. It's Tony Blair, then Shadow Home Secretary, and he's laying out the terms of a deal to the then Shadow Chancellor of the Exchequer, Gordon Brown. And he's offering Brown wide powers over domestic policy in any future government led by him, and a commitment to serve only 2 terms as Prime Minister. In return for Brown not standing against him in the forthcoming Labour leadership contest that was coming up at the time. Now, multiple accounts of the Blair-Brown years in number 10 and 11 have since described the power contest that went on between Blair and Brown. And Anthony Selden, Brown's biographer, puts it this way. This is what he writes. By the time New Labour came to power on May the 1st, 1997, Brown was already seething, believing that the crown of Labour leader, which he had hankered for all his life, to have been unjustly stolen from him by Blair after John Smith died in May 1994. For years, he plotted with his close cabal how to get rid of Blair, a man he considered a lightweight, devoid of ideological commitment, a mere popinjay strutting upon the Labour stage, his stage. Now, in the Westminster context, we don't need to rack our brains too hard to think of further contemporary examples of this pursuit of power. And there's a passage in one of the gospel accounts of the life of Jesus that is a stark reminder that this pursuit of power isn't confined to Westminster. It's a universal human experience in all places and in all time. And it comes in Mark chapter 10. And Jesus has been teaching his disciples that he's the long-promised Messiah, that his kingdom is coming. And this is not an earthly kingdom that will be brought about by military force or political force, but a heavenly kingdom that's going to be established by him suffering and dying. But the disciples, meanwhile, seem to be completely deaf to what he's been saying. And this is how Mark reports their reaction to what Jesus has been saying. It's verse 35 of Mark chapter 10. He writes this: "Then James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came to him. 'Teacher,' they said, 'we want you to do for us whatever we ask.' 'What do you want me to do for you?' he asked. They replied, 'Let one of us sit at your right and the other at your left in your glory.'" So James and John are fixated on what positions of power they're going to have when Jesus brings in this glorious kingdom that he's been talking about. They effectively want to be Home Secretary and Chancellor in this kingdom. And the rest of the disciples, by the way, are no better. When they realize a few verses later what James and John have been asking Jesus, they get really angry that James and John are basically outmaneuvering them for positions in the cabinet. Now look, these are Jesus' own disciples, for goodness sake. All of us are prone to this kind of pursuit of power. All of us seek power in our lives in different ways. And our motives for power are mixed. Some are very good, because let's face it, power can enable us to do really positive, amazing things for people and the world around us in many ways. But if we're honest, power can also be a way of achieving approval and recognition in our lives. It can be a way of acquiring things that we want, relationships, possessions, influence. And interestingly, I think it can also be a kind of defensive strategy in life, by which if we have power, we think we can make our lives secure and comfortable. So the more we're able to protect our health, to get the very best education, to live in a safe place, the more we think we've got power to guard against the uncertainties and the dangers of life. So the pursuit of power, I'd say, is a universal human drive. We can't avoid it. But there are some problems with this pursuit of power, and that's the second point, the problem of power. And the first problem is this: the idea that we're actually powerful to control our lives is an illusion. If we're successful in life, we tend to think that we've achieved success largely through our own efforts. And I don't mishear me. I don't want to diminish hard work and determination for a moment. They are necessary to achievement, but they are not sufficient on their own when we think about it. There are many other factors that determine our success and our power in life. Think about it. We didn't choose our genes, our childhood environment, the wealth and capability of our parents, the century that we were born in, the place that we were born in. So much of what sets the course of our lives is actually totally out of our control. W.E. Henley had a leg amputated as a teenager, but he went on to have a successful career as a poet, a critic and an author. And as a young man, he wrote that famous poem Invictus, which includes the famous lines: "It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll, I am the master of my fate, I am the captain of my soul." Now, he must have exercised great courage and determination to manage with the disability that he had. but his success as a writer would have been impossible had he been born without great literary talent, with below average IQ, with parents of different social connections and wealth. Donald Trump is a more recent example of falling for this illusion. You'll probably remember in the 2016 presidential campaign, he talked a lot about being a self-made man who'd become rich and powerful through his hard work and his brilliant business acumen. However, he omitted to mention that he started out by inheriting a multi-million-dollar property empire from his father. In short, we are not the infinite powerful creators that we like to think that we are, but we are actually finite dependent creatures, largely dependent on what has been given to us. The second problem about the pursuit of power is that we're actually constantly vulnerable to factors beyond our control. And that's certainly true in politics. Don will be able to testify to that. Just ask Theresa May or David Cameron. Neither of them left office at the time of their choosing. It was forced upon them by factors that were out of their control. And for the rest of us who are less famous and powerful, we too are constantly vulnerable to our power being taken away by the actions of other people, by sickness, for example, or more seriously, by death itself. And our experience of the coronavirus pandemic this past year must have reminded us of that reality. We are vulnerable in life to factors beyond our control. We are not as powerful as we like to think we are. But there is still a much more serious problem about our pursuit of power that the Bible speaks of from beginning to end. And it's that in the final analysis, this pursuit of power also ends up separating us from the God who made us. Because if we spend our lives trying to use power to secure our own reputation, our own success, to get self-sufficiency, we basically end up fooling ourselves into thinking that we don't need God. I used to live around the corner in the East End of London, to where the infamous Cray twins once lived and operated in Bethnal Green. And when Ronnie Cray died in 1995, he requested that Sinatra's "I Did It My Way" was played at his funeral service. And it's still apparently the most popular song that people request to have played at their funerals. We all want to do it our way, independent from God. It sort of comes naturally to us. However, the Bible does tell us that in the final analysis, actually, it is God who will do it his way. It's he who holds the power. The God of the Bible is the person who's given us life itself, who sustains our every breath, and before whom one day all of us must stand. C.S. Lewis put it this way in his book, The Great Divorce. There are only two kinds of people in the end: those who say to God, "Thy will be done," and those to whom God says in the end, "Thy will be done." Our pursuit of power is illusory, it's vulnerable, and most serious of all, it leads us to declare independence from the God who made us. It's sobering stuff. However, Jesus also has some wonderful news for us at the end of this passage in Mark 10 that I referred to earlier, because there he speaks of a different kind of power that can reunite us with the God who made us. And it's a power that can never be taken away by other people, by sickness, by death, by extraneous factors. And that's our final point, just to reflect on this morning, the secret of true power. In verse 45 of Mark chapter 10, Jesus says this to his disciples: "The Son of Man," that's him referring to himself, "did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many." Now, Jesus uses the language of a Roman marketplace here, where slaves could be freed by the payment of a ransom. And there are famous ransoms that have been paid in modern times for wealthy business people or their children who've been kidnapped, some stretching into hundreds of millions of pounds. You may have seen that recent film, All the Money in the World, about John Paul Getty, the third for whom a ransom was eventually paid. Apparently, the largest historic ransom in history that's ever been paid was for the last king of the Incas in 1533, and valued in modern money, it was £1 billion ransom that was paid. Anyway, Jesus describes us as people who need ransoming. If we've been created to love and to worship God, then it stands to reason we owe him everything, our lives, everything. And all the religions of the world recognize this. But the other religions of the world, apart from Christianity, teach us that it's by our good works and our religious observance that we can pay back our own ransom to God. But the amazing thing is that Christianity turns this completely on its head. It says, actually, it's hopeless to think that we can pay back our own ransom to God, to pay back what we owe him. You know, our debt is infinite. But Jesus claims here in this verse that in giving his life in our place, he actually paid that debt for us so that we might be forgiven. Or to put it another way, in the terms of this morning, he gave up his power. The most powerful person who ever lived, he gave up his power so that we might receive his true power. And according to the Bible, true power is to know that we are infinitely loved and forgiven by the God who made us. Simple as that. Now, isn't that the greatest power that any human being could ever possess? If we know this truth, then actually the key verdict on our whole life and what we've done with our lives is already in, even before we've lived the rest of our lives. We've heard that from the God who made the world, that we are loved and forgiven by him. That's amazing. I mean, think about it. If it's really true, that it has massive implications for how we think about power and how we use it. It actually means we're liberated from having to use power to try and secure our own recognition, our success, our influence, and our safety in life. Because these things, even though they are important, they're no longer of ultimate importance compared to knowing the love and forgiveness of the God who made us. So the person who grasps that they've been unconditionally ransomed and forgiven by the God who made them has this amazing new power within them of complete peace and security. And this power doesn't just remain an inward and a private power, but actually it turns people outwards to go and love and serve other people. And I just want to finish by telling you of a politician who came to understand this amazing power of Christ. And he's a famous example. It's William Wilberforce. Now, he became an MP in 1780, and he was ambitious, and he got into Parliament basically through his own private wealth and social connections. He described his first years in Parliament as follows: "The first years in Parliament, I did nothing to any purpose. My own distinction was my darling object. However, after about 5 years after he entered Parliament, he became a Christian. And he was turned inside out by the knowledge that Christ had paid the ransom price for his forgiveness. And he stopped serving himself, and he started looking outwards to serve others. And the lives of millions were transformed as he went on to secure the abolition of the slave trade in the British Empire, which an achievement that the historian G.M. Trevelyan described as a turning point in the history of the world. Now, I just want to end on that note of just asking all of us that question. Wouldn't we want that kind of power? Why don't I pray as we close? Let's pray. Our loving, almighty Heavenly Father, we do confess that we naturally use power to secure our own identity recognition, security in life. And we thank you that Jesus Christ, the most powerful person who has ever lived, gave up his power so that we might receive the true power of your love and your forgiveness. And we ask this morning that you would please give us the honesty and the humility to admit that we need the power of your forgiveness and to ask for your mercy. And finally, we pray for each one of us that the power of your unconditional love for us would turn us outwards from ourselves to go and love and serve others in whatever way we can. And we ask that in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. Well, thank you, Mark.
Jonathan, do you want to pick up on any questions?
Well, I have one here, which I will start with, Mark. And if there's anybody else has got them, please put them in. Or there's also an ability to put your hand up. I think if you click on reactions underneath, there's a little bar that says reactions. You can raise your hand, and then we can try and bring you in if you haven't put a question through. But I'm going to start with a question, Mark, that I've got from here is, which is, how much integration do you have with organizations like Christian Action Research and Education and the Christian Institute that try and educate us about laws being enacted by Parliament?
Thank you. And actually, yeah, we were talking about this in our breakout room. The answer is not that much, because we sort of operate in different spheres. We, as Christians in Parliament, we're a chaplaincy working internally in Parliament to resource members and staff at a very sort of foundational level to help teach them the Bible and Christian theology, for how that kind of forms the foundations for how they think about everything politically. So that's what we're aiming to do, is to try and provide them the soil in which their whole Christian life can grow, and how from that soil they can then go out and make their own political decisions, on the basis of that soil that they're growing in, and they will be helped in making those political decisions through the further input from people like Christian Institute and CARE, who are communicating with them from the outside of Parliament on specific policy issues. So our work is complementary to what CARE and Christian Institute do, but sort of working on different levels, if you see what I mean. But we're very supportive of the excellent work that they do, with CARE, for instance, are one of the sponsors of the National Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast every year, and CARE have provided sort of year on year for the last 25 years now a really excellent sort of graduate trainee program, where about 10 recent graduates come and do a year with CARE. They're taught on a Friday sort of basic Christian theology and worldview theology of getting involved in politics and the importance of serving in the public square and the theological foundations for doing that. And they're placed with parliamentarians on the other 4 days of the week. So some are with MPs, some are with peers. I'm sure Don's had people from CARE.
I have one for 1 day a week and have had for the last 5 years.
Yeah. And that's a really excellent program, that. And the people who've done that program, several of whom have since become gone into politics, become MPs, gone into local politics. So yeah. Okay. And I know the Christian Institute provide really excellent resources and work.
Okay, so I've got another question here. But while I'm reading this one, I want to just ask you a quick question. Is the balance of your membership, or the people coming along, the 25 to Bible study groups and 40 to the chapel and so on, is it across all parties, or is it predominantly one party or another? Or
yeah, it genuinely is across all parties, actually. So yeah, I mean, Don, that Wednesday morning Bible study group is a wonderful mix, isn't it?
It is. When I'm asked that question, Jonathan, I say, tritely say, it's amazing there are Christians in every political party, even the Scottish nationalists.
Very good. Yeah, that's another, reminds me of another joke. Which, okay, I invited our MP to a parliamentary launch of Open Doors World Watch list on the 13th of January by postal email this year online, to make parliamentarians aware of Christian persecution across the world. There was a big take-up by MPs. Unfortunately, I did not attend. Is there any better way to encourage our MP to think about active Christian thinking? That's another question.
To encourage our MP to think about
active Christian thinking. I think, is that John Martin? John?
Yeah. It's the case of, I think it was, because I write to him on a fairly regular basis on all sorts of on issues, some of them about Christian immorality and things like that, and I tend to get rather sort of bland replies, and I'm just wondering how we can actually communicate with our MPs to encourage, that we like to think in terms. I know his background, and he's works with the churches and things like that, but is there any better way to sort of encourage him to sort of think in terms of more Christian ethos?
Yeah, thank you, John. That is such an important question. I'm really pleased that you asked about that, because it is very easy for us from the outside, because, frankly, from the outside, we see, there are really, really important issues that we want our MPs to be engaging on, and often it feels like the only way of doing it is writing letters. And it can be that if we're only ever communicating with them on kind of vexed issues, that they just, they get frustrated and angry, slightly angry letters, from us, even if we're sort of phrasing them in the nicest. Now, I'm not saying that in your case, John, but I know I hear from MPs generally that they get, they get letters from people in churches and whatever, that they sort of expect would be a bit more gracious. So we've got to be really, really careful that we're very gracious in the way we communicate. So certainly number one. Two, but I think it's absolutely right to be engaging on those issues, by the way, and communicating on them, because otherwise they don't know that people care about them. Two, I think it's important that we as Christians, we're trying to engage across the spectrum on kind of political issues. I know some of us will specialise more in certain areas, but I guess one would hope, in terms of Christians across a certain constituency, would be writing to the MP on a whole range of issues, and sort of demonstrating that we're not just one moral issue type constituency, but that all of life, if God is real, if Christ is real, then every single aspect of life, matters, and how we live it out. And John, your question is so important in terms of how can we engage with them better, and that's a big part of the thinking of what I was saying about the National Parliamentary Prayer Breakfast, of trying to get church leaders together with their local MP at a better kind of relational level, getting them to know one another. And beginning to kind of talk and work out, well, how can we as the local church support you in the work that you're trying to do? How can we work alongside you and partner in serving the local community in some way? And so actually just flipping it, writing your MP a letter and saying, I pray for you regularly. I think you're doing an impossible job, and appreciate all the work you do. That it's because frankly that it is a nightmare job being an MP. You're just kind of deluged by correspondence all the time, and pressure is coming at you from every angle, at the sort of parliamentary end, at the constituency end, and to have positive letters of support and let's work together will basically mean all the world, and will really strike them. So I'm praying for you, and also how can we actually asking the question, how can we as your local churches, is there a way in which we can support you more, and doing things locally? I don't know, basically that positive offer of how can we support you. And I think in Guy Opperman's case, he's had very difficult personal challenges in his life, hasn't he, in the last, very recently. So for him to experience kind of prayerful encouragement and support from the church, his local churches, would basically mean all the world to him, and would be so distinctive from the kind of general correspondence that he's getting.
I was in terms of the invitation, I was also able to sort of express and say that we were sorry to hear about recognizing his situation. There have been a couple of times where I've actually written and thanked him for something that he's supported
great
as well. So it's not totally what about.
No, exactly. Well, thank you, and thank you so much for doing that, because that is the model example of what we should be doing, I think.
Thank you. I'm conscious we're running a bit over time. I've got one more question. Is everybody okay if I pose this to Mark, or do we need to finish?
No, go ahead, Jonathan.
Yeah. So this is one last question, which is that do we see ourselves and others as just as born to serve others, or born to serve ourselves? And the point being not to be too judgmental, because we see this in almost all organizations, this self-serving in almost all organizations. Did I represent that question right, David?
I think it's a really, really interesting observation. And look, I think if one's to take what the Bible generally says about us as human beings, that is the way we are born, with that bias towards serving ourselves rather than other people. We are self-centered rather than other people-centered naturally, although we still have this image of God, that we're made in the image of God, and that he has actually made us to relate to and love other people. The fact that we're made in the image of God means we're made in the image of a God who lives eternally is three persons, so lives eternally in relationship, and it's a relationship of an incredible self-giving love between Father, Son, and Spirit. And so if we're made in the image of that God, that is actually how we are made to thrive as human beings, when we actually turn outwards from ourselves to love other people. It's just that there's this constant battle going on between kind of turning in on ourselves. I think it was Augustine who originally coined that phrase of, human beings are turned in on themselves, incurvatus. That's our natural tendency, but we've been made actually to thrive, and that the best and fullest human life is to actually turn outwards and love other people. And I think we do experience that in practice when we have those sort of moments of giving ourselves in love. We realize that, oh yeah, this is actually the way of thriving as a human being. And in our culture at the moment, I think we must recognize as well that a generally secular Western culture is highly individualistic. You know, the worldview is that we are chance. You know, we've come about by chance, that we are material products of a process of evolution, and that it is about, you know, surviving as well as we can. And so therefore, you know, to live in many cases, to live an individualistic life is a sort of logical outworking of that. Of course, you cooperate in groups and stuff when you need, you know, when you need to, but it does tend even more towards individualism, that kind of worldview. And so there's an amazing opportunity for Christians in public life to gently and graciously commend a different way of being human, which is actually that we've been made to live in community, to relate and to love other people. And that's when we become truly human. And that is the best way of actually doing our politics together. But that we really need that underlying soil that kind of says, well, no, this is fundamental to being a human being, is actually to love other people rather than to love ourselves.
Thank you, Mark. Donald, shall I hand over to you?
Yes. Well, thank you very much, Mark, for joining us this morning. I felt rather guilty of raiding your weekend. I know you've got a young family and your wife has to take over the reins while you're spending time with us this morning. So do pass on our appreciation to her for
I will.
The time she surrendered this morning so that you could be with us. And thank you very much for your message. It's very relevant. Sorry, there's a question. John, did you want to come in? John's got his hand up.
He's giving a nice indication of appreciation.
John, you need to unmute.
So thank you very much indeed, and for your message, which was very, very relevant and appropriate to all of us on how we address the whole issue of power and influence in our own lives. So thank you very much indeed, and thank you everyone for joining. If you're happy, we might try and fix another one between now and the spring, if you're willing to participate at the end of, perhaps the end of February or whatever. We'll certainly try and arrange that if we can. So thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. Thank you particularly, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's been really lovely to meet you all. Thank you for having me. And yeah, keep on meeting together. This is fantastic.